Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the 7th editions of Ekkono's Open Fika. Today we will speak about Federated Learning, and my name is Rikard König, and I'm a CTO and co-founder of Ekkono Solutions. I have a background as a machine learning researcher for many years, and now I'm leading the development of our product here at Ekkono. So let's start with some rules of engagement. If you have a practical question, please use the chat function. And if you have a question to me, use the Q&A function, and we will answer them at the end of this presentation. And if you want to comment something, raise your hand. You have an icon in the bottom of your screen. You can push there, and everyone is on mute, so we will unmute you when you raise your hand. Okay, but let's start with a poll, just to get an idea of your own background with Federated Learning, so we can see what your interests are. And let's see if we can get the poll going. Oops, there we go. So how familiar are you with Federated Learning? You've heard about it, you work with it, other, or none at all? Yeah, so as you can all see, there are not so much experience about machine learning in the crowd, so that will fit this presentation quite good. We will have it on a high level, even if I will go into details, but nothing on an algorithmic level, at least. So I hope it will be to use for you all. So let's continue. So let's start with centralized machine learning, which is the paradigm that we've been living and working with for the last decade. The whole idea is that we have a set of devices that have something in common. And since we want to predict or learn something about these devices, we send the data to the cloud or a central server somewhere, where we build a model based on data from all of these devices. And then we manage, or we solve the problem with generalization. We can actually draw conclusions from all of these devices and create a better model than if we've been just looking at one device at a time. However, in reality, it's not so easy. To start with, our devices lives in very different environments, and they have different configurations. And the configuration may change over time. So it's rather hard and complex to represent all these possible configurations and differences using data and sensors. So that's a very complex task. And secondly, these devices produce so much data, so it's sometimes impossible to send the data to the cloud. An ABB power electrical power substation, for example, can generate 5 GB of data per second. You don't want to send all that to the cloud. So communication is an issue. And then you have another issue that's becoming more and more apparent, which is privacy or data integrity. So if you have users which you collect data from, that falls under GDPR. And if you have machines that have sensitive operational data, you don't want to share that with external partners. So even if the centralized machine learning approach solves the generalization issue, you will get problems with communications and privacy. So one approach for this is, of course, decentralized machine learning, which we here at Ekkono is working a lot with. The idea here is that instead of doing the calculations in the cloud, we do the machine learning at the edge on the devices. Of course, this is a harder problem since you have a much more limited hardware. But at the same time, the machine learning task of learning a model for each device becomes simpler by divide and conquer. Now you don't need to explain how this device differs from this device, their configuration and the environment. So it becomes easier You also solve the communication problem, since you only need to send the predictions or the inferred values to the cloud and not the raw data. And since the data can remain on the device, you also solve the privacy issue in a good way, right? On the other hand, if you only look at data from one device, you can't generalize. And typically when you deploy a new model, new device with a new model, you want to learn from the others. So to bridge this trade-off between decentralized and centralized machine learning, federated learning was introduced really. And federated learning is really a machine learning setting where many clients or mobile devices collaboratively train a model under the orchestration of a central server without sharing the data. So that's the core thing here. You want to learn from the different devices without sharing the data. And the general idea is that you have a supermodel that is common for all devices. And that one is sent down, so each device can use it. And then you want to train with data from each device. Then you have a small buffer of data. You train the model, and then you send the training derivatives, not the raw data and not the predictions as in centralized and decentralized learning, but the changes to the model. And these changes to the model, the updates, are sent to the cloud. And here they can be combined into a new supermodel or enhance the supermodel that you have. And this is typically done with a technique called federated averaging. Now the supermodel is updated and more powerful, so it can be sent down again to the devices and they can use it in a good way, right? And in this way, since you're only sending the training derivatives, you solve the communication problem since you're sending much less data. You also solve the privacy issue, since it's not the raw data that is transmitted, it's still here. Sometimes it's still possible to draw some conclusion from the training derivatives. So hence you often apply also some encryption scheme that you can still count on using the derivatives in an encrypted way up here. Or you can add some noise to hide what is actually true meaning of the derivatives and still learn up here. So different techniques for that. But federated learning promise them to solve the generalization, communication, and privacy issue. And I know now that you don't have so much experience from federated learning yourselves, but let's have another quick poll and see what you think is the most important factor for federated learning. Is it the privacy issue? Is the communication or the generalization to learn more? And what would it be in your own concept, in your own for your own organization? Give you a few more seconds there to answer that. The privacy and generalization, right? Okay, and that's typically what we experience as well. That's, I mean, I would say that privacy, it's the top reason that we look at federated learning, but also communication and of course generalization, especially if you do decentralized machine learning. That is a focus area for Ekkono Solutions. Okay, let's continue. Oh, that was the poll. If you want to be technical, you can divide federated learning into two types. The most common type when you start Googling federated learning is cross-device federated learning. And that's all about using smartphones. Google does, for example, have their next word prediction when you write something in Gmail, which is based on the federated learning. So since you need to analyze the words that you're typing, which is a rather personal thing, you don't want to send that data to the cloud. So instead, you train on the device and send the training derivatives to the cloud, so you can get a better and better model by then getting an updated supermodel to your phone. However, this setting and this type of federated learning is considering that you have a very large number of devices, like billion of devices. And there are also only a fraction of these smartphones then that are available at any one time, because you don't want to drain your users' battery. So you can only train these models when they are charging. And as well, since you want to preserve privacy, you can't assume to know which phone that is which, or from which phone the training derivatives are coming. In the same way, you don't have any state, so they can't remember anything between the rounds here, between the updates of the supermodel. And they are rather unreliable, since many people will unplug their phones while charging. You should expect that at least 5% of the participating clients will be lost during the training. So you need to handle all this complexity. And if you look at the data that you get, you will get example sentences, different words from different parts of the country and the world, but it will be more or less in the same language that you build your models for. Another type of federated learning is called cross-silo. And here it's typically organizations, like it can be airports or hospitals, who want to share information or share learnings without sharing data, because you may have rules that permits that. Or you have IoT, both smart homes, wearables, but for our case, also industrial IoT, where you have a smaller set of devices and another setting. So here we're looking at more reasonable amounts of devices. They're more available, especially in industrial IoT, and it's not a problem to address them. You know from which machine which training derivatives comes from. They can also have a state, so they can continue and learn on the device if you want to, and they're typically more reliable. Another problem here is that you don't only have this horizontal difference in data that they have seen, or different conditions, but you also have that they can have different sensors. So you typically don't have a perfect match here, and this complicates things when you want to combine your training results. So again, a fast question here. Which type of federated learning would be most applicable for your organization? Is it a smartphone cross-device, or is it more aimed as an organization with a smaller set who want to share data, or is it really IoT or industrial IoT? Yeah, as I suspected, there were not so many interested in or saw a correlation with the cross device, the smartphone, because it's really just the cell phone companies that have use for that. So it's more either organization and cross-silo, and that's also why Ekkono has chosen to focus on this type of federated learning. And if you do that, you can actually combine it, federated learning, with on-device learning, especially since you can have a state, you can remember stuff on the device. And that makes sense, because then if we said from the beginning that the devices reside in different environments and may have different configuration, the models should be different for each device, but you still want to learn among the devices. And if they can adapt the model on the device and then get a new supermodel adapted to the device, you can have the best of both worlds. So you can have a tailored model that can learn from the other devices. And you can also actually compare the devices through their models and look for deviating devices or typical devices. And then you can, as we see here, example on the right here, we have an sensitivity analysis of a health engine, and then we have found one that is degraded. It doesn't have the same effect as before. And we can look at how do they differ? How do the models tell them that they differ? And then you can get a clue of what is happening with that device. So by combining on-device learning with federated learning, which we do here in Ekkono, you gain even more powerful functionality. So some typical use cases or ideas of how to use it. So one idea could be to do it for predictive maintenance of drainage stations. You have pumps that needs to drain sewage in different parts of the country. In this case, we have Sweden. And they're often remotely located, and you will have a very limited internet connection. The pumps and the sewage system will have a slow degradation. So it will take a long time to get the data that you need to actually learn something. And the environment is also very different in Sweden if you live in the south of Sweden and the north of Sweden, especially in terms of temperature. And then when you look at the machine data, you will see that they haven't seen all the conditions. So when you put a new machine in the south of Sweden, you will need to wait half a year, maybe until you see a winter again. But if you can combine the learnings from a machine in the north of Sweden, you don't need to wait for that. You can actually learn from the other devices and speed up the learning. And here, the driving factor is really that you don't have enough internet connection or bandwidth to send the data, or it's too costly really, because you want to minimize the traffic and the hardware that you need. Another use case could be to do predictive maintenance on a heat exchanger that you typically have on large ships to preheat the fuel before it comes to is passed to the engine. And fouling in this heat exchanger can actually range from a few months to years, depending on which fuel that you put in them, and it differs on the location as well, on the environment, how warm it is, and the quality of the fuel and so on. And here you can also have a varying sensor setup. You don't have all the sensors on all the heat exchangers. And you typically also have a integrity constraint that you don't want to send the data and show exactly how you're running the equipment, but you still would like to have a good predictive maintenance schedule. So you actually do the right tasks when you get to harbor. I need to fix this one, I need to clean this one, and not that one. So again, this is a good example for where federated learning could help and speed up learning and generalize over the fleet of ships in this case. To summarize, what we look at here in Ekkono when we consider federated learning, it's foremost federated learning for industrial IoT. So we're looking at the use cases for a few hundred to 100,000 of devices, and we're typically seeing non-IID data. IID assumption is the basic of all machine learning, really. So it's the idea that the data that you train your model from is exchangeable with the data that you're going to predict from. Nothing has changed, really. But here, that's not the case, because the devices will have seen different environment. They are mobile. They deteriorate over time. It can be batteries that is getting less and less charging capacity as time goes on, or they can be repaired. We also see different sensor setups, so you need to handle that and to use data from devices with different amount of sensors. And of course, the devices also have seen different amount of data, so you need to take care of that as well. According to privacy, it may or may not be an issue. Sometimes we work with customer who owns their own equipment and manufacture that, so it's only them who's going to see the data. So there is more a communication issue and the generalization that is the driving factor behind that they want to use federated learning. But on the other hand, we see customer who sells machine or equipment to other companies where the machine will be used to be critical, do critical operations, and they don't want to send their valuable operational data, but they still want to have a predictive maintenance. So then you can actually learn on the device and use federated learning to learn among devices without sharing the data. And finally, when we're looking at federated learning, it's we look at different types of machine learning models. If you look at the internet, most of the research is done on neural networks, but that's not the silver bullet. Each application has its own characteristics, and you need to choose the right machine learning technique there. So we look at doing federated learning for more machine learning techniques than just neural networks. So that was the end of this short talk about federated learning. Let's see if I have any questions. In that case, write them in the Q&A. And while you're thinking about those questions, I will like to promote our next Open Fika. It's 8th, and it's all about IoT in Japan. So it's on the 20th of May between 10 and 10:30. And it will be our CEO, John Lindeen, and Hitomi Yatsu from our partner in Japan, Ubiquitous AI, who will speak about what's happening with IoT in Japan and look at some trends there. So it'll be really exciting to hear about that. Okay, so no more questions. Then I can just ask you to follow us on social media if you like what you hear, and then you will get all the updates. And you will find us in your favorite social media. Thank you so much, and hope you enjoyed this talk. Bye-bye.